one of the things that I want to give you a heads up on is we're also going to do movie reviews, and these movie reviews will be very different in that I'm going to do two ratings. I'm going to rate a movie based off of overall how the movie is and what I think about it, and then I'm going to give a rating on as far as Christian families, how they should look at this film. And the first film that I'm looking at actually came out a couple weeks ago, but it's called Alita Battle Angel. And it's an interesting movie because it was based off of a manga. I don't read mangas, and most of them are actually written in Japanese. But what's interesting about these types of movies is often in Hollywood, sci-fi will use scientifical things such as cyborgs, robots, and all those things to convey a spiritual message. And Alita Battle Angel is a bit on the nose, but Alita is very much symbolic of an angel. In fact, when you watch the movie, the man who finds her in the trash has discovered that she has fell from a heavenly city. And in this movie, it's kind of bizarre because there's literally cities that float in the sky. And apparently there was a great war called the Fall. So look at the symbology there, a war called the Fall. Alita, this warrior, falls from the heavenly city, and then several years later is discovered by a man. But this man finds her, repairs her, gives her a body, and the movie becomes primarily a movie about an individual known as Alita discovering who she is, and she has amnesia, which makes it even harder because she doesn't know where she came from. And it's constantly looking to the city and the skies. There's a lot of analogies. In fact, what's interesting about the movie is that while she's referred to as a battle angel, a lot of the evil cyborgs are referred to as demons in one of the sections. So there's some spiritual allegory going on with scientific sci-fi constructs, which is very common as mentioned before. But what's interesting about this movie is I was actually very impressed by the special effects. In fact, the producer of this movie is James Cameron, and he helped create a technology through Avatar that tracks the emotions in the face of the actors and puts them on a CGI entity. And in this case, the CGI is probably some of the best that I've seen. Obviously, Alita looks fake almost the entire time because her eyes are unbelievably big, but that was part of the point. In fact, she has huge eyes, and the villain of the movie has small needle eyes, and there's actually symbology going on in that regard. But this movie is quite impressive on a special effects level. As far as acting goes, Christopher Waltz is in it, and he was an interesting casting choice, but he works quite well. He actually does a great job as coming across as a father figure for Alita. Normally, Christopher Waltz is a villain in most movies, and he's usually quite disturbing, but he is one of the better actors of our time. The chemistry between him and Alita is very convincing. However, where a lot of criticism comes into this movie is the love story between Alita and a young man. And, well, the acting on the young man is questionable, although I would say the relationship is quite unusual considering the fact that Alita is a cyborg and the young man is a human being. What it does do well is it does capture very well the awkwardness of teenage relationships. And man, that relationship is very, very awkward. But one of the things that I appreciated from a Christian perspective of Alita, while there is symbology between fallen angels and good angels, and you do have evil and good that's presented, is there's a strong message of forgiveness in this film that I was not expecting to see. In fact, if you look at our culture today, forgiveness is very hard to find. If somebody is caught messing up in the past, it's really held against them to the point where it can ruin their careers. We see this in Hollywood. We see this in politics. And yet, Alita, and I won't give out any story details, is pretty much put in a position where she finds out something about someone's past, and instead of, well, becoming angry and vengeful, she actually shows a tremendous amount of love and compassion and actually forgives this person's past. This is an interesting message because the thing that the person's guilty of is directly against who she is, which is a cyborg. And there's a very strong message of compassion and forgiveness. However, you could say it contradicts itself at the same time in that the movie also shows how quick Alita is to practice vengeance. And man, one thing I will tell you about the rating system on this movie is it's PG-13, but I think it should be rated R. While most of the violence is done on cyborgs, it's some of the most, violent action sequences I've seen with limbs being cut off, robots being cut in half. And I was even surprised that there's actually a decapitation of a person where their head is being held, and somehow this got PG-13. Oh, and just so you're not surprised, PG-13 films are allowed to say the F word at least one time. If they say it more than that, it automatically becomes rated R, and Alita makes sure that she says the word at least once. But as interesting of a story it has to do with elements of forgiveness, it's also a very violent but very well-made movie. Overall, if I were to give a score to this movie as a movie itself, I would probably give it a 7 out of 10. While it's definitely an interesting film, very well made, you also have to be prepared for one thing. It doesn't actually have an ending. And because of that, it leaves you hanging. And I'm not even sure if there's going to be a sequel. Depends on the box office for this film. But I definitely give this a 7 out of 10, which is a very strong rating. And it definitely has a very strong hero that I appreciate and you don't see very often in film. From a Christian's perspective, should parents allow their kids to watch this one? Well, as I mentioned before, this is not a PG-13 film to me. This is definitely rated R. And if any type of situation occurs where you have your child watch a movie that has a lot of these themes in them, I do recommend that you sit them down and you talk to them. This is not made for anyone who's not in high school or middle school. But definitely be aware of the content in this film. And do be aware that even though it may have some Christian themes in it, I would not even call this film a Christian movie. In fact, you can see a heavy influence of Eastern thought in this film, mainly because of its origin being a manga from Japan.